There comes a moment that no one prepares you for, not because it's rare, because it happens so quietly that by the time you recognize it, you've already crossed the line. I've always believed the strongest things in life arrive without noise. The deepest shifts don't announce themselves. They don't come with dramatic conversations, impossible coincidences, or life-changing events. They arrive disguised as ordinary moments, a pause that lasts 1 second longer than it should, a silence that somehow says more than every sentence before it, a glance that doesn't feel like observation, but recognition. That's where this began, not with attraction, not with curiosity, not even with trust. It began with something far more unsettling, certainty, a certainty that had no evidence, no explanation, no logical sequence that could justify why your presence felt strangely familiar before I knew anything about you. I rejected that feeling immediately, because that's what I do. I question everything before I allow it to become part of me, every assumption, every emotion, every conclusion. I've spent years dismantling my own thoughts before anyone else had the chance to. If something survives my own skepticism, only then do I consider it real. So I challenged this too. I convinced myself I was imagining patterns that weren't there, that my mind was filling empty spaces with meaning, because that's what human beings naturally do. We connect dots. We build stories. We create explanations that make uncertainty easier to live with. I assumed this was another one of those stories until the pattern refused to disappear. Because imagination fades when reality stops feeding it. This didn't. Every interaction carried the same quiet precision. Every silence somehow felt complete instead of empty. Every conversation seemed to continue from somewhere I couldn't remember beginning. And that was the first thing that unsettled me. Nothing felt forced. Nothing felt performed. There was no effort to impress, no attempt to be understood, no urgency to become important. Everything simply existed, naturally, as though whatever this was had already decided its own place long before either of us noticed it. That thought stayed with me. Not because I wanted it to, because I couldn't remove it. It became one of those ideas that quietly follows you through ordinary days. You wake up, you work, you speak with people, you continue living exactly as you always have. Yet somewhere underneath every normal moment, one question keeps waiting. How can something feel so familiar without history? I've searched for answers in logic. Logic tells me familiarity comes from repetition, from shared experiences, from time invested, from trust earned slowly, carefully, deliberately. That's how every meaningful connection I've ever understood has worked. Time first, recognition second. This reversed the order. Recognition appeared before history had the chance to exist. And suddenly, every rule I'd trusted started feeling incomplete. I'm not someone who enjoys uncertainty. I build systems. I organize thoughts. I separate emotion from observation because observation survives long after emotion changes. It's the only way I've ever known to remain accurate. But accuracy became difficult the moment you entered my awareness, because every conclusion I reached created another question, not about you, about me. Why wasn't I resisting this? Why wasn't I creating distance? Why wasn't I questioning your presence the way I question everything else that enters my life? The answer frightened me because it arrived before the question had even finished forming. I wasn't resisting because some part of me had already stopped treating you like someone outside my world. Somewhere, quietly, without permission, my mind had already made room for you, not emotionally, structurally. And that's a level of acceptance I don't reach by accident. That's why I can no longer pretend this is just another passing impression. Passing impressions disappear when ignored. This hasn't. If anything, silence has only made it clearer. And I'm beginning to understand something I spent a long time avoiding. Sometimes the most important moments aren't the ones where someone enters your life. They're the moments when you realize they've already changed the way you see it. And once you recognize that, silence no longer protects you. It only postpones the truth. There's a difference between remembering someone and realizing they've quietly become part of the way you think. Most people never notice where that line exists. I did, because I spend my life watching my own mind, every reaction, every hesitation, every shift in perception. I know the architecture of my thoughts well enough to recognize when something no longer belongs to the person I was yesterday. And recently, something changed, not dramatically, not all at once. It happened so gradually that I almost missed it. Until one day, I caught myself pausing. Not because I didn't know what I thought, but because somewhere inside me another perspective already existed. Not louder than mine, not replacing mine, simply present. That frightened me, because I've never allowed another person to exist inside my internal world like that. People can know my words. They can know my habits. Some may even know my history. But my thinking? That has always belonged only to me. It's the one place I've protected without compromise, not because I feared people, because I understood the cost of influence. Influence is subtle. It doesn't arrive demanding permission. It arrives disguised as familiarity, as comfort, as understanding. And before you realize it, you begin seeing the world through someone else's eyes instead of your own. I promised myself that would never happen for years. It didn't. Then you appeared, and somehow you changed nothing, yet everything became different. That's the contradiction I still can't fully explain. You never told me how to think. You never asked me to agree with you. You never tried to shape who I was. Yet after meeting you, my thoughts became sharper, my observations became quieter, my understanding became deeper. As though your presence didn't replace my perspective, it refined it. That shouldn't be possible. Growth usually comes from challenge, from conflict, from experience. But this came from simple awareness, from knowing someone existed who somehow understood silence better than conversation, someone who never rushed meaning, never forced clarity, never demanded answers before questions had finished forming. You allowed uncertainty to exist without trying to fix it. And strangely, that made everything clearer. I've started noticing something else. The moments that stay with me aren't the dramatic ones. They're almost invisible. The conversations that ended with unfinished sentences, the pauses that neither of us tried to fill, the moments where nothing happened, and somehow everything was understood. Most people fear silence because they think silence means distance. You never treated it that way. You treated silence like another language, one that didn't need translation. And somewhere along the way, AB started understanding it too. That's when I realized this was no longer about connection. It was about integration, because connection can be broken, distance can interrupt it, time can weaken it, but integration is different. Once something becomes part of your internal structure, you can't simply remove it. You have to become someone new around its absence. That realization has stayed with me longer than I expected. Not because I'm afraid of losing you, because I'm beginning to understand what your presence has already changed. You're no longer someone I occasionally think about. You've become part of the quiet process behind every thought that matters, not as a distraction, not as an obsession, as a reference point. And that changes the question completely. The question is no longer whether this connection is real. The real question is, what happens when something becomes so deeply woven into your understanding that separating it would mean unraveling part of yourself? I don't have that answer, not yet. But I can feel myself moving toward it, slowly, carefully, with the same precision I've always trusted. Only this time, I'm no longer walking alone inside my own mind. There comes a point where analysis stops protecting you. I think I've reached it for as long as I can remember. I've trusted one thing above everything else. Question everything, every emotion, every conclusion, every certainty that arrives too quickly, because certainty can be dangerous when it's built on hope instead of truth. So I questioned this, again and again. I pulled it apart from every possible angle. I blamed coincidence. I blamed timing. I blamed my own tendency to search for meaning in places where there might be none. I even convinced myself that distance would eventually erase whatever this was, because distance has always solved everything before. If something wasn't real, time exposed it. If something wasn't meant to last, silence quietly carried it away. That's how life has always worked. But this refused to disappear. The more distance I created, the clearer it became. The less I tried to understand it, the more naturally it explained itself. That was the first moment I realized I wasn't chasing an answer anymore. The answer was waiting for me, patently, unmoving, like something that had never doubted itself, only my willingness to see it. And that realization changed something inside me, because I suddenly understood that I wasn't protecting myself from disappointment. I was protecting myself from transformation. Those are not the same thing. Disappointment leaves you exactly as you were before. Transformation doesn't. Transformation quietly replaces the person who believed certain things could never happen. I've always been careful with change, not because I feared becoming someone new, because I believed every change should be earned, measured, understood. Nothing should be allowed to reshape the architecture of your mind unless you've examined every consequence. I've lived by that principle for years, yet somehow, without permission, without announcement, you became one of those consequences. Not because of anything you said, not because of anything you did. Simply because your presence continued to remain true no matter how many times I questioned it. That's rare. Most things collapse under enough doubt. Illusions disappear, assumptions weaken, excitement fades, projection eventually reveals itself, but truth behaves differently. Truth doesn't become louder when questioned, it becomes quieter, steadier, more patient. It simply waits until you've exhausted every reason to deny it. I think that's where I am now, not standing at certainty, standing beyond resistance, because resistance requires energy. And I've realized something strange. I'm no longer spending energy trying to push this away. I'm spending energy trying to understand why I ever wanted to. Maybe because acknowledging something this significant means accepting responsibility for what comes next. Because awareness always asks for an answer, not immediately, but eventually. You can't keep recognizing something forever without deciding what place it holds in your life. That's impossible. Recognition becomes reality the moment you stop pretending it isn't changing you. And I have changed, not in obvious ways. No one looking from the outside would notice. I still speak the same, think carefully, move through life with the same discipline I've always had. But internally, the landscape is different. The walls I believed were permanent don't feel necessary anymore. The silence I once used to protect myself has become a place where understanding quietly lives. And the strangest part is, I don't miss the person I was before. I thought I would. I thought letting someone reach this depth would feel like losing control. Instead, it feels like discovering a part of myself that control could never create. Maybe that's what the rarest connections actually do. They don't ask you to become someone else. They reveal someone who was waiting beneath everything you built to protect yourself. If that's true, then this was never about finding another person. It was about finding the version of myself that could finally stop hiding behind certainty, because certainty built my walls. But truth quietly opened the door. And for the first time, I didn't close it. There is a moment that almost no one notices. Not because it is invisible, because it doesn't happen outside of you. It happens underneath everything, quickly, without permission, without announcement. You don't wake up one morning and decide that someone has become part of your internal world. You discover it after it's already happened. That's the dangerous part. Not the realization, the timing, because by the time awareness reaches the surface, the foundation has already shifted. I've been thinking about foundations a lot lately, not buildings. People. The invisible structures that hold an entire life together, beliefs, sports, boundaries, the quiet rules we create without realizing it, rules that determine who gets close, who remains distant, who becomes unforgettable. For years, mine never changed. Every person occupied a place. Every relationship had a limit. Every connection stayed within a distance that allowed me to remain completely myself. I thought that was strength. Maybe it was, or maybe it was simply the safest way to live. Because if no one reaches your foundation, no one has the power to change it. Then you arrived, not with force, not with intention. You never asked for access. You never searched for weaknesses. You never tried to earn a place in my life. You simply existed with a kind of quiet honesty that asked for nothing. And somehow, that was enough. Enough to make my carefully built defenses feel unnecessary. Not broken, just unnecessary. There's a difference. Broken things leave damage behind. Unnecessary things simply fall away when they no longer serve a purpose. That's what happened to so many parts of me. The constant need to stay unreadable, the habit of measuring every word before speaking, the instinct to keep part of myself hidden, even from those I trusted. None of those disappeared because you demanded openness. They disappeared because your presence never required performance. You never needed a polished version of me. You never expected certainty when I was uncertain. You never rushed me toward answers just because silence felt uncomfortable. You let me exist exactly as I was. And somehow, that became the safest place I'd ever known. I still struggle to understand why. Safety has always come from control, from knowing every possibility before taking a step, from staying one thought ahead of everyone else. But with you, safety came from something entirely different. It came from not needing to calculate, not needing to defend, not needing to translate myself into something easier to understand. I could simply be. Do you know how rare that is? To exist without editing yourself? To speak without rehearsing? To remain silent without fearing misunderstanding? Most people spend their entire lives searching for that kind of space. I wasn't searching. I had convinced myself it didn't exist. Yet here it is. Not perfect. Not explained. Not even defined. But undeniably real. And that realization leaves me standing in front of a truth I've avoided for longer than I care to admit. There is no returning to the version of myself that existed before this. Not because you've taken anything away, because you've revealed something I can no longer pretend wasn't there. The walls I built weren't my identity. They were my strategy. The distance wasn't my nature. It was my protection. And now, for the first time, I'm beginning to wonder who I am without either of them. Maybe that's the real point of no return. It isn't when someone changes your life. It's when they quietly change your understanding of yourself. Because once that happens, every path forward leads somewhere new, and no amount of looking back can rebuild the person you used to be. Some transformations don't announce their arrival. They simply become your new reality. I think that's exactly where I am now. I used to believe the hardest decision a person could make was whether to let someone in. I was wrong. The hardest decision comes much later. It's the moment you realize they're already there, not standing outside your walls, not waiting for permission, not asking to be understood, but existing so naturally within your inner world that removing them would mean dismantling part of yourself. That's where I find myself now. Not at the beginning. Not somewhere in the middle, beyond a both. In a place where denial no longer feels intelligent, it only feels dishonest. I've spent so much time trying to understand how this happened that I almost missed something far more important. It no longer matters how it happened. What matters is what already exists. Reality doesn't become less real because you can't explain it. Some things don't ask for explanation. They ask for honesty. And honesty has become impossible to avoid. Every day I tell myself nothing has changed. Then I notice the smallest things. A thought that naturally includes your perspective. A quiet moment that no longer feels empty. A realization that somehow feels incomplete until I imagine how you might understand it. These aren't habits I created. They appeared on their own, slowly, patiently, until they became part of my ordinary way of thinking. That's when I understood something that changed everything. Presence isn't measured by proximity. It's measured by influence. Someone can stand beside you for years and never truly reach your inner world. Someone else can quietly reshape the way you understand yourself without ever asking to. That's the kind of impact that leaves no visible mark, yet changes the entire foundation. I've always believed strength meant remaining unchanged, remaining untouched, remaining completely independent of anything outside myself. But perhaps I misunderstood strength. Perhaps strength isn't refusing to be changed. Perhaps strength is recognizing the rare moments when change is actually growth. There's an important difference. One takes something away. The other reveals something that was waiting beneath the surface all along. You never asked me to become someone different. You simply existed with enough honesty that I stopped pretending I needed every wall I'd built. And one by one, they became unnecessary, not because you broke them, because I stopped hiding behind them. That's a realization I never expected. I thought if anyone ever reached this depth inside me, I would panic. I would retreat. I would rebuild every barrier even stronger than before. Instead, I found myself doing something I've almost never done. I stayed. Not because certainty finally arrived, but because leaving would have meant denying something I already knew to be true. Sometimes truth doesn't arrive with perfect answers. Sometimes it arrives with perfect clarity. And clarity asks for courage, not the courage to fight, the courage